But it's so good to see you guys this morning. And a couple of things I want to give you before we get started. Easter's coming up. It is April the 20th. I want to remind you we have a 9:30 and an 11 o'clock service. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal. It's going to be one of those days that people are going to remember. And the statistic is this. 66% of people surveyed said they will go to church on Easter if a friend invites them. So 2/3 of them. Now here's the thing. If you show up on Easter without someone with you, we're just going to know you have no friends. And that's going to be embarrassing, okay? So bring somebody with you, 9:30, 11 o'clock. The kids are going to be performing at the beginning of each service. You're going to enjoy that. Aaron Pelsu is going to be here with us. We're going to have an absolute blast. So we'll say more about it, but that's coming up April 20th, 9:30 and 11 o'clock. And then I'm going to put up a slide. Let's see. I want everybody to take a picture. Take your phone out and take that picture, okay? Because this is important, actually. People don't know how to get hold of me, and so they get hold of me everywhere. I get messages on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I don't even think I'm on TikTok, but I get messages on TikTok. I got 2 different email addresses, and sometimes those messages get overlooked. So we're just going to make this simple. This is my email address. If you ever need to get hold of me for any reason, if you will email me at that address, I will make sure. Shannon checks my email several times a day. She makes sure that things get followed up. And so if you ever need me for any reason whatsoever, I don't care how small you think it is, if you will email me there, that'll just make it simpler, and that'll just make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. Now, I told you next week, Aaron Pelsu will be with us for the very first time, and I think everybody's excited about that. I've been telling him, listen, go easy on them. I said, these are people who have not stood up and sung for years. I mean, they are a mess, okay? So go gentle on them. And he's going to be here, and I gave him his opening song next week is a Jelly Roll song, so you don't want to miss that. And it's perfect with what we're talking about. And we have some great plans. We have a great plan on Palm Sunday. You are not going to want to miss Palm Sunday. I'm going to take 3 different prophecies that were fulfilled on Palm Sunday. Aaron has a song that he's written, original song he's written through each one of the points. You're going to get like 3 5 or 6 minute messages from me, and Aaron will be singing between each one of those points to tie it all together. And then we're going to observe communion together. So Palm Sunday is going to be a special morning, and then Easter is going to be a blast. So we look now. Since Aaron's coming, I decided to do this 2-week series, and I'm calling it Made to Worship. And what I want us to understand is that I want us to understand what worship is and what worship is not. And so this week, I'm calling my message, I'm a worshiper. And you may not realize it or not, but I'm letting you know, everybody in this room, you were born a worshiper. It is absolutely natural for us to worship. So the question we have to think through is not, am I a worshiper? You are a worshiper. The question is, what or whom do you worship? Because every one of us are worshipers. And I know what you think about, well, this dude's going to come in here with a guitar, and we're going to have to stand and sing. And some people hate singing, right? And so let me just tell you, worship isn't just singing. Because I believe every one of us would admit that we've gone to church, we've stood and we've sung, but our mind was somewhere else. Have you ever done that? Stood up, how great is our God? Well, I hope the Cowboys are great today. That's what I'm thinking about right now. And I hope lunch is great. And I hope my meeting tomorrow at work goes great. See, that's kind of where our minds are. So understand, you can sing and not worship. Worship isn't just exalting, that's a good biblical word, or just lifting up God. Now, that's a part of worship. It can be worship. But you need to understand that when God created you, he did not create you to exalt him. He actually created angels to do that. They were doing it before you were ever created, before the world was ever created. They're doing it right now. And according to the book of Revelation, they're going to be exalting and lifting up God for all eternity. But my point is simply this. God did not create us because he needed someone to exalt him. He needed someone to worship him. That's not what worship is. So I'm going to give you a very, very simple definition of worship. I think it's one that we can all understand. It's just 2 words. I'm going to unpack these 2 words. Worship is love expressed. Love expressed. And I'm going to break down those 2 words, love and the word expressed, over the next few minutes. But let me just say this. If it's love and it isn't expressed, it's not worship. And if you express something, but it's not love, it isn't worship. So worship is nothing more than when we express our love to God. And here's the thing. We can do that in all kinds of ways, and I want to talk about that this weekend. I only have 2 points, okay? I'm going to keep this as simple as I possibly can. But here's the first one. Worship is love. Now, I'm going to show you an interesting verse from Deuteronomy chapter 11. and this may shock you, but I want you to see that God actually commands for us to worship him, to love him. In fact, I know what some of you are thinking, well, how can God command us to love him? You can't command someone to love you, right? But when you think about it, even in marriage, love is a choice. It's a decision. In other words, love isn't something that you fall in and you fall out of. Now, I know we use that term. I was in love, but I fell out of love. You don't fall in and out of love. You fall in and out of romance. You might fall in and out of infatuation, but you don't fall in and out of love, because love, according to the Bible, agape, is a decision. It's a choice that you can make. It means seeking the highest good of the other person. So understand, love is a decision you make. Love isn't something you feel. And so God says, I command you to love me. And it's because he understands that at the end of the day, we have a choice. And basically what he is doing is he's commanding us to make the right choice. Because if we make the right choice and love him, he knows it's going to be in our best interest. It's going to be for our benefit. So let me show you the verse. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 1. Love the Lord your God, keep his requirements, his decrees, his laws, and his commands always. Every once in a while, it's good just to look at different translations. And actually, the New King James Version does a better job of translating what the Hebrew, the original language, actually says. So let me read it to you from the King James, New King James. Therefore you shall. That kind of sounds like the Ten Commandments, right? Therefore you shall love the Lord your God, keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments always. Now, if you drop down to verse 13 of Deuteronomy chapter 11, if you faithfully obey the commands I am giving you today to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, and then if you would continue to read, God says, I'll send rain on the land, I'll do all of these things if you love me. So my point is simply this. We are commanded to love God. But I know what some of you are thinking, well, Mike, that's Old Testament. The Old Testament's kind of weird. I don't even read the Old Testament anymore. What about the New Testament? Well, let me show you what Jesus had to say about commanding us to love God from the New Testament. Matthew chapter 22, verse 35. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Jesus with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Now notice this. This is the first and greatest commandment. And it's like Jesus dropped the mic. Any questions? That's pretty much simple what it is. So this lawyer, he approaches Jesus and says, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, you should love the Lord your God. So I want you to understand, we are commanded to love God. But God says, I'm going to make it easy on you. I'm going to give you a new heart so that you actually want to love me. Let me show you a couple of interesting verses. Ezekiel 36, verse 26. I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Another verse, Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart. The word circumcise just means I'm going to make a covenant with you. So the Lord your God will make a covenant with your heart and the hearts of your descendants. By the way, that's a great promise. So that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. So God says, not only am I going to give you the command to love me, I'm going to give you the ability to love me because I'm going to give you a new heart. Now, I want you to think about something. Have you ever been around someone who's a Christian and when you walk away from their presence, you've had this thought, man, I wish I loved God as much as he does. Or I wish I loved God as much as she does. Just raise your hand. Have you ever been around someone you walked away and like, man, they're just so passionate. I mean, it just exudes out of their life. Well, let me tell you just a couple of things about love. This is what you need to know. First of all, here's one fact about love. Love leaks. It leaks. I mean, think about this. When you first get saved, when you just get reconciled back into a relationship with God, when God stamps across your life righteous, which means because of what Jesus Christ did for you on the cross and his resurrection from the dead, that you are now in a right standing with God. When you realize that for the first time, when you realize that your sins are forgiven, your past sin, your present sins, even your future sins taken care of, when you realize that he is going to give you the Holy Spirit to empower you to live the life that deep down inside he wants you to live, but you also know that you want to live. When it hits you that when you take your last breath here on planet Earth, You're going to take your next breath in heaven, and you're going to live with God for all eternity. I'm telling you, when you realize that, when it takes place, your heart is full of love. It is full of appreciation. It is full of gratitude. But you know what can happen? It can leak. And I'll give you an example, marriage. When you stood at the altar, what did you say? I'm going to take you for better or for worse. And nobody doubts that when they say that. I mean, love just oozes at the altar, right? You cannot imagine a situation where there would be any wedge in that relationship whatsoever. I take you for better, for worse. You didn't mean it. You didn't mean it. In fact, turn to your spouse right now. Let's just get it out. Turn to your spouse. If you're with your spouse, say, I didn't mean it. Do you know how I know you didn't mean it? Because when things got worse, you weren't like, oh, they're so cute. No. When things got worse, you got mad. You got angry. You got irritated. You got frustrated, right? One of my favorite, I'm going to write a book one day, Great Moments in Counseling. Because I have some. Some of them I can't even talk about in church, so I'd have to put them in a book. I mean, they're that good, right? But I'll never forget, I had a couple in my office one day, and I mean, they were going toe to toe. In fact, my concern was that people were going to be walking up and down the hallway. They were dropping the F-bomb left and right. I mean, I'm telling you, I needed attorneys there. It was getting brutal, right? And I'll never forget, he finally said, you married me, you told me you took me for better or worse. And without even blinking, she said, yeah, but you're a lot worse than I took you for. And I'm like, hang on to that. I got to write that down. I don't want to forget that. Just, But see, that's what I mean. We find out, they're a lot worse than I took them for, right? Do you know why we sometimes feel that way? Even though we said, for better, for worse? It's because love leaks. Love leaks. It's a heart problem. Now, why does love leak? Especially as it relates to our relationship with God. Well, Ephesians chapter 6 is that really, really famous passage where it talks about spiritual warfare, about putting on the full armor of God. But Paul explains to us, by the way, when Paul talks about this, he's saying basically that Satan daily is shooting flaming arrows at our heart. And when the Bible talks about our heart, it's not talking about the heart muscle, it's talking about our soul. It's talking about our innermost being. It's our mind, it's our will, our emotions. And every day it's under attack by Satan. Now here's the question. Why would Satan be so busy shooting flaming arrows at our heart or our soul? Well, it's simply so that he can punch holes in our heart. He can punch a hole with an offense. He can punch a hole with a hurt. He can punch a hole in your heart by trying to get you to believe a lie that's not biblical. Now, you notice in the verse, you don't have to be a victim of Satan's flaming arrows. Because we're told we can block every one of those with the shield of faith. But what if you're having one of those days where you're not using the shield of faith? What if you allow one of those flaming arrows through and you end up with a hole in your heart? See, that happens all the time. It can happen in our human relationships. Someone says something, someone hurts us, someone disappoints us, someone doesn't follow through on something they said, and it puts a hole in our heart. And what do? We build up walls. Maybe just a brick at a time, but we build up wall, and it's to protect our heart. But see, not only can it happen in our human relationships, it can be true in our relationship with God. So you can get mad at God. You can get angry at God. You can get disappointed at God. Some of you sitting here right now, you have a huge grudge against God. And maybe it's because you prayed and prayed and prayed, and he didn't do what you wanted him to do, when you know he could have stepped in and he could have intervened. And maybe you've had that grudge for years. And as a result of that, there's this huge hole in your heart, and that love and that gratitude and that appreciation for God, it's been leaking out over time. My point is simply this. When you notice someone, when you observe someone, and it just seems like when you're around them that they have more love than you do for God, you need to give yourself a heart exam. You need to ask, hey, are there any holes in my heart? Are there any things where I feel like God has disappointed me? God didn't show up when I wanted him to show up, and I'm still holding that against God. Do I need to deal with that? So that's the first thing, love leaks. Here's the second thing, love grows. And you see that with children, for example. I mean, when you hold that baby for the first time at the hospital, you cannot imagine you could ever love that baby any more than you did in that moment. But you do. Because as that child grows, your love grows. Now, there are days you don't like them a whole lot. There are days you understand why lions eat their young. You get that, right? Right? You may not like them a whole lot, but you know what? You still love them. You still love them. So understand, love in our hearts, it can leak, but it also can grow. By the way, that's why we sometimes feel like our love for God has grown cold. You ever feel that way? Just kind of apathetic. Yeah, if I go to church, I go to church. Yeah, if I read my Bible, I read my Bible. Yeah, if I pray, I pray. It's like, where did the passion go, right? But see, I want you to understand in those moments, that's when you press into God. In those moments, that's when you lean into God. That's when you're honest with Him. Do you know what most of us do? Go AWOL. Just kind of stop going to church, stop fellowshipping, miss our small group, stop talking to people about it. But I want you to understand, you can go to God and say, God, you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. I just don't feel the same way about you I used to. That is not going to intimidate God. That is not going to, I tell you what, you lean into Him, He will lean into you. He will draw you to Himself. He'll bring you back. He'll help you identify the holes in your heart. He'll send His Spirit to mend up the brokenhearted so that that tank can begin to fill up again. So understand that worship is love. It's love. Second thing, worship is expressed. Remember this, if it's love but it's not expressed, it's not worship. And again, let me use the analogy of marriage. If you marry someone, if you're married, but you don't express your love to your spouse, I'll just tell you, you don't have a healthy marriage. You don't have a healthy marriage. I mean, it's not enough to say, hey, I told you I loved you when I married you, and if it ever changes, I'll let you know. See, that's not going to get it done. That is not going to be sufficient. Love has to be expressed. Let me say it another way. Love expressed is love communicated. It's got to be communicated. It's got to be given. It's got to be received. It's not just an inclination. It's a demonstration. You go back to 1 Corinthians 13, that great treatise that Paul wrote on the topic of love. He says, love is not, love does not. It's communicated in words. It's communicated in actions. So you got to understand, God created us so that we can communicate with Him. So He could communicate His love to us so that we could communicate our love to Him. Go all the way back to the garden. Remember that? Adam and Eve were in the garden. Think about this. When God originally created Adam and Eve, He wasn't thinking that He was just originally creating Adam and Eve. He's creating mankind. And so the way that Adam and Eve were able to walk and talk with God in the cool of the day, that was God's plan for all of mankind, not just for Adam and Eve. But what happened? Sin came into the world. Now I want to show you a verse that maybe you've never seen before. And when I say that, you've probably seen it. If you've ever read through the Bible, if you made it as far as Genesis chapter 4, most of us at least make it that far before we quit, right? You've read it. In fact, Shannon was one of the ladies, I know several of you ladies, you read through the Bible this year. She read through the Bible this year, and she would say, I'm 3 chapters behind, I got to catch. So I know she read this verse, but here's the thing. Have you ever read a verse, but then one day you were reading it again, like, man, I never saw that again. Or I never saw that before. That happens to me all the time, and I've been studying the Bible for years. You'll see something, and like, I never saw that before. No, you just never noticed it before, or it didn't jump out to you before. So let me just show you an interesting verse. Genesis chapter 4, verse 25. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son. He named him Enosh. Now notice this phrase, maybe you never saw it again. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. Sometimes when you're studying the Bible, it's helpful to look at another translation. This is what the NLT, the New Living Translation, says. At that time, people first began to worship the Lord by name. Ever saw that before? In other words, it was during Enosh's lifetime that mankind first began to worship God. Now, I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. You remember Adam and Eve? They were in the garden. God walked and talked with them every day. Every day He walked with them. Every day He met with them until sin came. And this is what's interesting. If you read Genesis 3 and 4, you will discover that there are no conversations after the fall that were initiated by mankind. There's no situation where someone's crying out to God or asking God or approaching God. Every conversation that takes place after the fall, before you get to Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, it's God initiating the conversation. Think about this. Adam and Eve took of the fruit. They ate. The next thing you hear is, Adam and Eve, where are you? Initiated by God. Who told you you were naked? Initiated by God. Did you eat from the tree? Initiated by God. When Cain killed his brother Abel, God asked, where is your brother? So get this picture. Adam and Eve are in the garden. They sin. God pronounces judgment. Adam and Eve are driven out of the garden. In fact, it says in the last verse of Genesis chapter 3, they're driven out of the presence of God. When Cain kills Abel, he's driven out of the presence of God. That's in Genesis chapter 4, verse 16. When you get to Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, it says, for the first time, mankind worshiped God. You know, wait a second, Mike. That's 10 verses. Well, you got to remember, they lived a long time back then. Adam lived to be 930 years old. Seth lived to be 912 years old. Then he had a son named Enosh who lived to be 905 years old. So we're talking 2, maybe 3,000 years where no one's approaching God, where no one's worshiping God, where no one's seeking God. And then it's in Enosh's lifetime, Adam and Eve's grandson, that people began to communicate with God. It's when people began to worship God. That's when people began to do what we were created to do, and that's worship him. Now, as we're kind of moving, as I said, you know, any church that gets together on the weekends, there's 3 pillars. There's 3 pillars that have to be present. 1, the Word of God. There has to be the teaching of the Word of God. 2, there has to be prayer. And I told you, I am looking forward to having the day where every week I can ask anybody who wants to stay who needs prayer can stay and be prayed with after each service. We have to develop that team. And if that's something that you would be interested in doing, I would love to hear from you. You have my email, just let me know. But the third one is worship. And most people are like, well, you know, if I didn't show up and teach the Bible or we didn't pray, you're like, what kind of church is this, right? But we're perfectly fine not worshiping. Because I really don't like singing, you know? But we have to deal with this, right? So I want to talk about this, and here's the thing. I want to talk to the men. Because, see, I really have a desire for men to worship God. For men to be able to express their love to God. See, our kids need to see that. Our family needs to see that we are people who love God and we're not afraid to express that love to God. Now, we may do it in all different kinds of ways. So I want to talk to the men for a second. And I want to speak specifically to the men because, listen, guys, we all know that women express love easier than men. That is just a scientific fact. There's all kinds of scientific studies that bear that out. And I know that part of the challenge is that men are less verbal than women. That's another sermon for another time. But let me just tell you about one study. According to researchers, one study, women learn by listening and talking. And you ladies are thinking, yep, we learn by communicating. We listen and we talk. But this is what's interesting. According to the same researchers, that's not how men communicate and learn. Men learn and communicate by watching and doing. And by the way, this is one of the great struggles in our education system. It's set up for girls. You go, you sit in a desk, someone teaches, you listen, and you communicate. This is why boys like shop class, auto mechanics. When I was in high school, you could even take an electronics class, tailoring classes, because we love to watch and do. That's why men like to drive. We get to watch and do, unless there's somebody we have to listen to. But we just get to watch. I'm just kidding. By the way, man, let me just tell you, one of the great perks you got, you didn't even know it came with marriage, you got a driver instructor for life. How about that, right? See, my whole point is, men, women, we learn and we communicate differently. Now think about this. I'll take it even further. Jesus had 12 disciples. 12 disciples. How many of them were men? All of them. All 12 of them. What did he find himself saying over and over again? Watch what I do and do what I do. That's how he trained them. Watch what I do and do what I do. And you're thinking, yeah, but he told parables, and it's because ladies were there. Okay, so he had to tell some parables. But let me give you even more proof. How did the disciples typically respond? How do these men typically respond when Jesus told a parable? We don't get it. We don't have a clue what you're talking about. I guarantee you the ladies got it every time, right? My point is we're just different. For example, men do things together and they're closer. Just by doing things together. For example, you can get a group of guys to play golf, right? You play golf all day. You may not say 3 meaningful words to each other. Nice shot. Woo, where did you get that hook? What was your score? That's about it. You won't say anything to each other, and you will finish the round, and men will be closer. It's the weirdest thing in the world. And of course, when he gets home, ladies, what do you say? What did you talk about? What did you talk about? And what do the men say? Nothing. And we're not lying. We really didn't. And you ladies don't get that, right? So you kind of keep pushing us, trying to get questions, trying to get us to open up and communicate. So ladies, here's my advice to you. If you want to know what a man did while he was with his guy friends, don't ask, what'd you talk about? Ask him, what'd you do? He'll talk. He said, well, we decided to play 12 Oaks. We got there, and of course, Aaron Pelso, he played. He's always 30 minutes late, drama queen, worship leader. Anyway, we went out to the driving range, and we hit some balls, and he finally showed up. We played the front 9, but you know what? It was cart path only because the fairways were wet, and nobody was really hitting the ball great, so we decided just to stop at 9. We didn't even know if we were going to play the back 9, so we went in to have lunch, and by the way, I had chicken wings. Big Jerry had a salad. How can you be 6'9", 400 pounds and eat a salad, right? And Austin, he was useless because there was a snake in his pool, and the kids kept calling him saying, you got to come home and get the snake out of the pool. So he finally had to leave, and then Joe and Rich are there. They can't play golf on lick, but they just bust on each other constantly. We just laugh and laugh and laugh. I'm telling you, if you ask him what he did, he will talk and talk and talk and talk. And guys, when your wife goes out with the women, when she gets home, don't ask her, what did you do? Ask her, what did you talk about? But you better carve out some time. You know what I'm saying? She's going to take it. Now, my point is this. Men and women are different, but I want you to understand, men do talk. Ask them about March Madness. Ask them about the Masters. Ask them about deer season. My point is this. A man will talk about something he's passionate about. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. If you're married but you have a single friend, right, and he's always with you, smokes cigars with you, plays golf with you, but one day you smoke cigars and he's not there. And then one day you're playing golf and like, what's happened to Bill? Bill plays every week. He hasn't played the last 2 weeks. Whatever happened to him, right? But every time you're with him, he wouldn't shut up talking about the girl. He met a girl. Like, can we talk about something? All he wanted to talk about was a girl. Now he's not playing golf. Next thing you know, you go to the mall. He's standing outside Victoria's Secret holding a purse, right? Yeah, okay, this is what happened to Bill. My point is simply this. Men communicate, but men communicate about what they're passionate about. I mean, this is why I'm telling you this. You say, I wish I was more passionate about God. Or I wish I was more comfortable worshiping God. Well, listen to me. You do love God because God created you with the ability to love. He created you with a heart to love. He created you with an ability to communicate that love to him. But I want you to understand something. You don't have to do it the same way your wife does it. So as we become a church of worshipers, and next week, this is my message. I'm an instrument. I'm going to blow your mind because some stuff I learned blew my mind. I can't even wait to share it with you till next week. But I want you to understand something. As we begin to worship and develop this as a congregation, because it's biblically what we have to do, you don't have to worship the way everybody else worships. Shannon and I were just at a conference where 5,000 Christian leaders were there. I'm telling you what, you get 5,000 Christian leaders and worship music, it turns into like the worship Olympics. Who can out-worship each other? You know, who can get up on their chair, get on somebody's shoulders, who can do a back somersault while their hands are up in prayer. I mean, it just gets crazy, right? But this is what I noticed, and I was there because I was working on this. You look around, the ladies, they're up, their hands are swaying. I mean, and I don't know why the ladies get that dance hand thing they get going on, but all that stuff's going on. You know what men are doing? I call him Savior. God, listen, maybe you won't hear this anywhere else in culture but here. Men, God did not make you to be like a woman. Can I get a witness, right? Yeah. He made you to be a man. You need to find out a way to worship. If it means you have to go out into the woods, go to the woods, get on your deer stand. And when the sun comes up, say, God, wow, thank you. What a beautiful sunrise. I am so grateful that the sun has risen in my life. You figure out how to talk to him. You figure out how to show your love to him. If it's the ocean, go to the ocean and say, wow, God, as the ocean is so vast, your mercy and grace has been so vast to me. Thank you. Or the majestic mountains. Oh, it reminds me of your character and who you are, God, but I just love you so much. Just talk to him. Just get comfortable in your skin talking to him, talking to your family. I tell you what, I used to be kind of like that. You know what? I grew up in a Free Will Baptist church. We didn't have drums. I'm going to talk about all the different references to percussion next week. We didn't have drums because that was secular, right? We had an organ and we had a piano, and it was horrible. But anyway, that's what we had. But here's the thing. I didn't know how to worship. I didn't learn how to worship. Even when I pastored a mega church, I didn't know how to worship. I remember one time I did this. You know, I raised my hand. But anyway, so I'm not expressive that way. But I'll tell you what. I never listened to Christian music. Most of the time when they would sing songs at church, I'm like, never heard this before. Now, I knew all the Aerosmith songs. I knew Rolling Stone, I can grow right with those guys. But I didn't listen to worship. I thought it was cheesy. I thought I got to listen to 10 songs on the radio to find one I liked. But I figured out how to find some. You know, we had Zach Williams. He was our worship leader for months, right? And I just began to listen to him. You can go to Apple Music, Worship Essentials. There'll be 100 songs there. You don't have to listen to all of them. And Shannon will tell you, if she was standing here, she'll tell you. And you ask her, she'll see me at the gym, some tears just running down my face. And it's not because my body hurts, although it probably does, but it's just like, there are sometimes just, you know, I have my quiet time in the morning. I get up early because I know if I don't get it done, it ain't going to happen. But I've come to believe that music needs to be a part even of our private worship with God. And so if I study something that morning or I read something and I spend some time in prayer and then I'm listening to this song about I call you Savior, I call you Healer, you know what I can't help but think about? How God's healed me. How God's redeemed me. How God's restored me. And sometimes just out of gratitude, you know, it just happens. But I'm challenging you, learn to worship. And then when we come together, let's worship him. And what is worship? Love expressed. See, one of the great things about getting together and doing this instead of just watching it on YouTube is we can come together, we can show, and we can worship together. And here's the thing. We can show love to one another, and we can show love to God. Last Sunday morning, I was standing in the back while the video was playing at the beginning. But before the video started, you could just hear the roar of conversation. You know what my thought was? This new family, this new body, is learning how to love each other. And you can hear it. It used to be quiet like as a funeral in here. But now everybody's getting to know it. So you're expressing that love to one another. But we do it differently. I never had a mentor. I never planned on being a pastor, so I never had a mentor. And one time I was invited to this thing called the Leadership Network. It was in Dallas, and it was a thing you had to commit to. They would bring in 10 mega church pastors 4 times a year, and really it was to spend the week together so you could learn from each other. Things that were working, mistakes you didn't want to repeat, but basically learn from each other. But I'll never forget the first time I went, the guy that kind of welcomed us spoke, and he said, there's 2 great things that if you're going to be a great pastor, effective pastor, there are 2 things you have to have in your life: a strong calling and a strong mentor. I'm like, crap. I'm 0 for 2 because I didn't have a strong calling. I just kind of, through a series of circumstances, ended up doing this. I didn't have a mentor. The first church I pastored, I was 24, I was the pastor. No one didn't teach me how to pastor. I didn't know how to do a funeral. I had a seminary professor. I went back to seminary. He would teach me, this is what you do at a funeral. I had no idea. But there was one of my elders, probably the closest thing I ever had to a mentor, but it was very quiet, very unexpressive. I remember one time I had somebody speak when I couldn't be there, and I said, Lenny, what did you think? He said, too many words. He uses too many words. He just didn't speak a whole lot. In fact, one time, the kind of guy he was, we're having lunch one day after I'd known him about 9 years. 9 years. And we're sitting at lunch at the Carriage House on La Mirada Avenue. I can still remember it. And he just said in passing, yeah, I remember when I was a prisoner of war in World War II. And I'm like, whoa, back up a second. You were a prisoner of war? Yeah, I was in Stalag 17, where they shot the Great Escape. In World War II, yeah, I was a bomber pilot. Crashed over Germany. Got caught by the Germans, spent 2 years in Stalag 17. and went on to tell me all this. Took me how they knew that the Allies were coming in and how the war was almost going to be over because they could tell where the bombing was getting closer and closer to Berlin. And finally they took, one night they lined up, he was an officer, they lined up all the officers outside in the cold. And he has frostbite so bad he couldn't get his boot on, and how he had to wrap it in a towel. And one of the other officers said, he can't go on a march. They would take him out on a march. And they sent him to the medic. Everyone they took out on a march that night, it was a death march. None would ever return. He was quiet. He never bothered to tell me that. I said, what was it like when the war was over? He said, oh, it was cool. He said, Patton actually came in on a white stallion. He had 2 silver 6-shooters and came in and said, the war's over. I said, what did everybody do? They just scattered. They just scattered. But he never bothered to tell me that. Now, here's the thing. I'm pastoring a church in Southern California on a school property. Not that we're renting. Someone had purchased the whole property. Football field, baseball field, beautiful school property. We owned it. That's where we had our church. Another church had a school, decided they wanted to expand their school, so they bought the school property, and thought, while we got the property, let's build a building, let's start a church there. That was the church I pastored. He never told me, but one day we were having lunch, and it came out that he's the one who actually bought the school. He saw it. It was his idea. He said, I should buy that school. And maybe one day we'll have a church there. He was more interested in the church than the school. He was just that kind of guy. I remember one time we had a ministry where we went to, ladies would go to the women's prison, and they led a woman to Christ, and she had been in for several years, drug habit, theft, all kinds of things. And she was supposed to get paroled back to the Bay Area. We were in Orange County, California, Southern California. And so we got lawyers, we went to court, we got her paroled to our area so she could become a part of our church. Of course, Lenny and his wife, Evie, invited her to come live in their house. They got her a job. Lenny bought her a car. 6 months, it was beautiful. She was at church every week. People were celebrating. One day he came home from work, she was gone. She had stolen everything valuable in the house. And I never forget sitting in an elder meeting after that happened, and one of the elders said, well, I hope we learned a valuable lesson. I hope you learned a lesson, Lenny. Lenny said, I didn't learn anything. Nothing to learn. God told me, if you see a need and you can meet it. I'm not responsible for the outcome. That was Lenny Moen. But let me tell you something. One time I went to a conference that was full of Campus Crusade missionaries from all over the world. I was talking to one of them, and the guy said, you have no idea how many missionaries in this room right now, on the field, in Taiwan, wherever they are, Vietnam, because of Lenny Moen and his generosity. He wasn't like this. I don't think I ever saw him sing. I know he never lifted a hand, but he knew how to express his love to God. You got to figure that out. Because if you're not expressing it, it's not worship. And you're missing on connecting out with God on a level like you've never imagined in your life. And when we express our love, it just enhances our relationship with God. It's just like being married. You know, it does something about bringing the relationship together. It develops that intimacy between God and us. Now, next week, I'm going to talk about corporately, why we have to worship together corporately. And actually, it's going to be a lot of fun next week. And I think God's going to move in some amazing ways. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this topic. And I didn't realize until I started studying this, I have never in 44 years of marriage taught on worship. And I ask your forgiveness for that. Because it's such a big part of who we are. It's such a big part of our relationship with you. Just the ability in our own way, in our own skin, to be able to express love to you. Now, Father, music does play a part. And we're going to talk about why that's so important next week. Well, Father, what I want us to walk out of here today is realizing, each one of us, in their heart realizing, I am a worshiper. I was created to worship the God who created me to be in a relationship with me. And help me to find the way to do that in my own skin. But we have to figure that out. And it will deepen our relationship with you. And it will deepen our relationship with one another. So we thank you for this time we've had together. In your name we pray. Amen.